I'm thinking about comments I made in a prior post about theistic evolution. And I'm not going to change my view on that, but I do want to add something because it raises a question about the image of God in man and Adam and Eve. And what I said in the prior post was that I didn't think theistic evolution was true, but I think that there's a way to characterize it that's at least consistent with Christianity. And what you have to do is actually show how God actually used evolution. And if what you're doing is just affirming the materialistic process and trying to baptize it with God language, then I think you're making a mistake. However, if you think God is somehow involved, you have to characterize how he's involved, and you have to do so in a way that makes sense of what the Bible calls the image of God in man. Now, I think if you do not believe in a literal Adam and Eve, and this can be construed in two different ways, I'll tell you those in a moment. If you do not believe in a literal Adam and Eve, you're going to have serious problems with Orthodox Christianity, because Genesis is the book of beginnings. It talks about the beginnings of lots of things, but one of the things it talks about is the beginning of the problem. And in telling us the beginning of the problem, it then spends the rest of the book explaining how the problem got solved. But it has to be a real problem. It has to be a problem that actually happened in history. If it's a fairy tale, then it doesn't do any work for our worldview. And in fact, there's no real solution to a problem that isn't a real problem in the sense that the Bible describes it. So how is it that we get a historical fall from two original human beings from which all the rest of the human race descends, carrying with them their fallen nature such that all human beings need to be saved? That's a theological problem you have to kind of fit into your theistic evolution, and I think that's going to be hard to do. Now, some people might be able to do it by saying there was descent with modification that God somehow was involved in, and when it got to a certain point of this one creature we're going to call Homo sapiens that God selected then to miraculously give them a soul that bore God's image, which means there's probably a lot of other human beings that didn't have that had evolved to that point. I mean, that's another problem, but at least you've got a unique couple who are the beginnings of humanity as we know it. That is, ensouled with souls that bear God's image. You got to make that happen. If you can't fit that into your program, then you are not going to be able to make peace with the Christian worldview as characterized in the Bible. And the image of God in man is central. It's mentioned like twice at least in Genesis chapter 1. We see it again, maybe in Genesis chapter 2, but certainly in Genesis 6, that identifies our moral obligations to each other. So however you construe the theistic evolution enterprise, you can't leave this out. And you can't just stick it in there. You've got to make sense of the notion of an Adam and Eve as the parents of our race, which bears the image of God and is fallen and needs to be rescued by Christ. That's the problem you have to solve if you're a theistic evolutionist.